So today's lesson, we are continuing our study in trees of the Bible. This is lesson 5. We're going to be examining another tree today, which I'm calling Nebuchadnezzar's Great Tree. So to our Jim that is visiting us today, we have been studying different types of trees in the Old Testament and what they represent symbolically. So at this point, we've studied 3 main trees that represent Israel. Can y'all remember what 3 trees we've studied that are symbolically used for Israel in the Old Testament? The vine, the olive tree, and the fig tree. The fig tree, right? So the olive tree, the vine, and the fig tree are used in both the Old Testament and the New Testament as a symbol of Israel. Those were our first 3 lessons. Then last week we added another tree, which was the bramble tree or the thornbush. Do you remember what we saw that to represent last week? The bramble tree and the thornbush.
Something negative?
Something negative. Something with thorns and sticky. And we looked at 2 applications, right? Within the parable in Judges 9, immediately referred to Abimelech and everything that surrounded his situation there. But on a bigger picture, we were looking at the thorn bush as a picture or a foreshadow of the Antichrist and of the end time kingdom. Remember? So the thorn bush, in one way or another, was associated with Satan. It was deceitful in making a promise about its shadow, which wasn't true. It had a big mouth, and it was violent. Remember, it went against the 70 sons of Gideon. We looked at the connection to globalism there. And it had thorns, and the thorn is always associated with a curse, specifically the people around Israel that would engage in idolatry. So the olive, fig, and vine represent the nation of Israel. The bramble tree was more of a representative of an individual. Now, let me remind you, the purpose of this study is to study 2 really important trees: the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So before we get to those 2 trees, we're taking sort of a survey of the Bible and how are trees used symbolically. At this point, 2 applications. A tree can represent a nation or a collection of peoples. A tree can also represent an individual. A tree can be used to represent something good. A tree can be used to represent something negative. So today we're looking at Nebuchadnezzar's Great Tree. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 4. So if you want to camp out in your Bible in Daniel chapter 4, all of the other reference verses that we'll be considering are there on your notes. This is a familiar story. We've studied Daniel before. We've looked at the book of Revelation. And in the same way that we saw the thorn bush having an immediate application within the context of Judges last week, the same thing's going to be true for Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the great tree. So we're going to figure out what his dream was. We're going to look at Daniel's interpretation of the dream and how it applied in that time and place. And then we're going to look at the bigger application. What is this foreshadow and how does it relate to eschatology? So kind of the same pattern as last week. So in Daniel chapter 4, King Nebuchadnezzar has this amazing dream. This is not the first dream that he has had. If you'll remember in Daniel chapter 2, he has the dream of that great statue with the head of gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, the legs of iron, and the feet of iron mixed with clay. Do you remember who interpreted that dream for him? Daniel. And Daniel did such a good job interpreting that dream. Nebuchadnezzar didn't even tell him what the dream was, and he said, "Tell me the dream and its interpretation." So this precedes what we are about to read about. So Nebuchadnezzar trusts Daniel at this point, and as you're going to see, they have a pretty close relationship. So later on, Nebuchadnezzar has another dream, and that's what we're going to read about today. So Daniel chapter 4, starting in verse 4 through 17. Who's going to be our first reader today? Daniel chapter 4, 4 through 17.
Is your daughter going to read?
She didn't have her Bible ready. Is yours?
Okay. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream, and it made me fearful, and these fantasies as I lay on my bed and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. So I gave orders to bring into my presence all the wise men of Babylon, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the conjurers, the Chaldeans, the diviners came in, And I related the dream to them, but they could not make its interpretation known to me. But finally Daniel came in before me, whose name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in him is the spirit of the holy gods. And I related the dream to him, saying, O Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, since I know that a spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery baffles you, tell me the visions of my dream which I have seen, along with its interpretation. Now these were the visions in my mind as I lay on my bed. I was looking, and behold, there was a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew large and became strong, and its height reached the sky, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth. Its foliage was beautiful, and its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the sky dwelt in its branches, and all living creatures fed themselves from it. I was looking in the visions in my mind as I lay on my bed, and behold, an angelic watcher, a holy one, descended from heaven. He shouted out and spoke as follows: Chop down the tree and cut off its branches, strip off its foliage and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from under it and the birds from its branches. Yet leave the stump with its roots in the ground, but with a band of iron and bronze around it, in the new grass of the field. And let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him share the beasts of the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let a beast's mind be given to him, and let 7 periods of time pass over him. This sentence is by the decree of the angelic watchers, and the decision is a command of the holy ones.
Okay, thanks for reading. So this is Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now, he gives the specific details of the dream. Daniel's going to repeat these details, and in order to gain the understanding of the meaning of this, we have to make sure we know the details. So as usual, we're going to go back and look at every single detail that's given so we can remember those and gain wisdom from them. So first question, how tall was the tree?
Great height.
Very. Great height to the sky. How tall was it? Very, exactly. Yes, it could be seen from any place on earth. So in order, right, what about the people? Yeah, see, Norm's getting technical. Is this a round earth thing, right?
Flat Earth.
Flat earth.
The earth must have been flat then, huh, Norm?
What's that?
At this time, the earth must have been flat.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah, something must have changed since then. So the tree has a great height to the sky. Some say, in some translations, the height reached up to heaven. We could say, yeah, the tree was tall in the sky, but we're going to consider what does it mean for the tree to reach up to the heavens. And it could be seen from all over the earth. So it was something that was central and visible, and everyone was aware of the presence of this tree. Now, what were the characteristics of the tree? What part of the tree is described?
Fruit,
Fruit,
leaves,
branches, absolutely. So this is a majestic tree, very tall, could be seen from everywhere. It has abundant fruit. It has branches. There's a shadow. What nested in its shadow and in its branches?
animals and birds.
Animals and birds, absolutely. So the fowls of heaven, it's a deer stand. Yeah, good shelter, right? You're up there with your binoculars. I love it.
Deer stand.
A deer stand. Do note, King James says the beasts found shelter and the fowls of heaven. Okay, remember that phrase because you know we're going to end up at some point in the lesson in the book of Revelation. And we're going to be referring to beasts and fowls of heaven. So this is a natural tree. If there's a tree that fits this description, it's going to be a natural shelter for birds and beasts. What did the watcher from heaven, which is basically an angel, decree for the tree?
Chop it down.
Chop it down, right? Cut the tree down. Was the tree to be permanently destroyed?
No. Well, the stump was allowed to stay.
Yeah, the stump is allowed to stay. You know, it was really interesting as I was writing out the notes for this lesson, I left and I was driving around and I saw a tree in someone's yard that was just a stump. And I was like, wow, that looks like Nebuchadnezzar's tree. After the tree was cut down, what would the experience of the tree be? Let's specifically look in verse 15.
Be drenched with the dew of heaven.
Drenched with dew, right? And his portion would be with
The beasts of the grass.
the beasts in the grass. Okay, so it's going to be cut down. The tree was majestic. When it's cut down, it loses all of its majesty. And it says its portion would be with the beasts in the grass of the field, and it would be wet with the dew of heaven. Now, in verse 16, notice that this tree has a heart. What type of heart did it originally have?
A man.
It has a man's heart. So we can, at this point, realize this tree represents a man. We've seen how a tree can be used to represent a nation. The olive tree representing Israel, the fig tree representing Israel. Here we're looking at a specific tree that has a man's heart. So we're going to see this tree is representing a man. It originally has a man's heart, but what heart would be given to it? The heart of a beast. And for how long would the heart of the beast exist? 7 periods. And look at your translation because they're all a little different. 7 periods. King James says 7 times. Does anyone else have a different translation? Until 7 times pass over him is what the King James Version said. Now, for what purpose did the watchers make this decree? Why did they say this tree has to be cut down? It was fruitful, it was functional, it was shelter for the birds and the beasts. Why did they say that it had to be cut down? You got it. Yeah, first of all, it was a holy command. They were executing God's will. And second of all, so that the living can know that the Most High reigns. So this magnificent tree is cut down or humbled in order that God could be glorified. So God is the ultimate ruler. His throne is over all. So Nebuchadnezzar is going to give this dream to Daniel because the Chaldeans, the soothsayers, the magicians, or the magi, they could not interpret this one, just like they couldn't interpret the dream from Daniel chapter 2. But Daniel has interpreted the dream before, and so Nebuchadnezzar trusts his ability to interpret the dream, and he recognizes that goodness in Daniel. So Daniel has already been in this position with Nebuchadnezzar once before. And from that interpretation, look what Daniel's lesson is. Daniel chapter 2, verses 21 and 22. Daniel, speaking to Nebuchadnezzar about his first dream, says, "He changeth the times and seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings." So Daniel is going to give Nebuchadnezzar a lesson in humility. He says, it's God who gives you this kingdom, and God can remove you from this kingdom. He's the one that is sovereign and ruling over everything. Psalm 103:19 also speaks to this. The Lord hath prepared his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom ruleth over all. So all of the world powers, all of the leaders that we have, only have their power because they receive it from God, because his throne rules over everything and he is sovereign. So this is Nebuchadnezzar's dream. He dreams of this great tree, fruitful, lots of branches and leaves, very, very tall, could be seen from everywhere. It's shelter for the birds, it's shelter for the beasts. The watchers decree that it is to be cut down. It's going to experience the grass of the field and the dew of heaven until 7 times pass over, in order that humanity recognizes that God's throne is over all. So this is Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Those are the details of his dream. Now, Daniel is going to give us the interpretation. So let's hear what Daniel has to say about this. His interpretation can be found in verses 18 to 27. You ready, Willow?
This is the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had. Now Belteshazzar, tell me what it means. For none of the wise men in my kingdom can interpret it for me, but you can, because because the spirit of the holy gods is in you. Daniel interprets.
Real loud, sweetie.
Then Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, was greatly perplexed for a time, and his thoughts terrified him. So the king said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its meaning alarm you. Belteshazzar answered, My lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies and its meaning to your adversaries. Then the tree you saw, which grew large and strong, with its tops touching the sky, visible to the whole earth, with its beautiful leaves and abundant fruit, providing food for all, giving shelter to the beasts of the field, and having nesting places for its branches for the birds of the air. You, O king, are that tree. You have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown until it reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to distant parts of the earth. You, O king, saw a messenger, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, Cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump bound with iron and bronze and the grass of the field, while its roots remain in the ground. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let him live like the wild animals until 7 times pass by for him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree the Most High has issued against my Lord and King. You will be driven away from people, and you will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like cattle and be drenched but with the dew of heaven. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes. The command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots mean that your kingdom will be restored until you acknowledge that heaven rules. Therefore, O king, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness is by being to the oppressed. It will be that then your prosperity will continue.
Okay, good job. Thanks for reading. Daniel is such a good listener. He listens to Nebuchadnezzar tell the dream. Then he repeats the dream, confirming that he's heard all the details. And then he gives the interpretation of the dream. Were the soothsayers, Chaldeans, or magicians able to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream?
Nope.
No.
No. Why was it that Daniel was able to interpret the dream?
God's power.
Divine guidance.
God's power, right? He has the guidance. Remember, whenever he interpreted the first one, he interpreted it by prayer. He was not given the details of the dream. He was able to retell Nebuchadnezzar's dream and give the interpretation because he paused, he asked for some time, and he went and prayed. So he is getting his interpretation and his wisdom directly from God, and Nebuchadnezzar recognizes this, and he trusts Daniel's wisdom. And again, that has happened before. So, according to Daniel, who does this tree represent? Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, the tree had the heart of a man, so this tree represents an individual person. So keep this in mind. We have a tree representing a person, right? We've looked at a tree representing a nation. Now we have a tree representing an individual person. So this tree represents Nebuchadnezzar himself. How do you suppose this is a fitting symbol for Nebuchadnezzar? Think about the details of the tree. Why would this be a good fitting symbol for Nebuchadnezzar? Strength?
Provides for the people.
Yeah, the kingdom was strong.
He protects his people.
Right? Absolutely.
Gives them place.
Think about the first dream, the statue with the golden head and the chest and arms of silver, so on and so forth. Nebuchadnezzar is represented by that head of gold. Those portions of the statue in different metals represent the world kingdoms at that time. So Nebuchadnezzar is the ruler of the world kingdom at this time, including having jurisdiction over the nation of Israel. So he is the ruler of the kingdom, the greatest kingdom at the time. So the height of the tree and the fact that it could be seen from all over the earth is simply a testament to the fact that his kingdom was widespread and the people of the kingdom recognized his central power and his authority. And it was very, very high, very, very strong. And like you said, the leaves, the fruit, the branches, it was a functional kingdom, and it was providing for the people of the kingdom. Shelter, food, provision, all that good stuff. The tree was cut down with its stump left in the ground. It was wet with the dew of heaven, and his portion was among the beasts of the field. What does all of this imply for Nebuchadnezzar?
Yeah,
Both.
a lost kingdom.
A lost kingdom.
Yeah.
He's going to be brought down low, but
He can come back.
he's going to come back, right?
The roots are still
And consider Daniel's heart. Whenever he interprets the dream, what does he say? May this apply to your enemies and not you. He loves King Nebuchadnezzar. He serves King Nebuchadnezzar. And he doesn't want anything to happen to him or his kingdom. So he feels very compassionate, and that's evident in what he says. But he's going to be cut down. He's going to be humbled, but he will be restored. And the purpose of his wild experience is for what reason?
To recognize God as
Yeah.
more powerful than he is.
Yeah. You know, a human in that position as world ruler is a very dangerous position for any human. A human who gets leadership or a position of honor can have the temptation to become very prideful. And so we're going to see that happens to Nebuchadnezzar, but God corrects this and he humbles him. The very last thing that Daniel says, verse 27, is it possible that Nebuchadnezzar is able to avoid becoming like the beasts of the field and being drenched with the dew of heaven? Can he avoid that? Yes, he can. How would he avoid it?
By acknowledging God.
Acknowledging God. Do what?
Doing right.
Doing right. Yeah, being righteous. The King James Version says, break off your iniquity by righteousness. So he has this opportunity to avoid this period of punishment. Prophecy works that way. Sometimes a prophecy is given. Think about Jonah's prophecy over the land of Nineveh. He says, you're going to be destroyed in 40 days. But Nineveh wasn't destroyed in 40 days. Why? Because they repented. They turned back to God. They turned back to righteousness. And the punishment that was decreed did not happen. Does that mean Jonah was a false prophet? No. It means he was given the prophecy, but the people responded correctly. So Daniel talks to Nebuchadnezzar, turn to God, repent, humble yourself, and you can avoid this ordeal. So he's given that opportunity, and every single one of us are given that opportunity as well. Turn from our sin, humble ourselves before God, and he will take care of us. He will reward that. So we're going to look at the result of Nebuchadnezzar's dream and how Daniel's interpretation comes to be true in verses 28 through 37. So 28 to the end of the chapter. Would someone like to read that?
All this happened to Nebuchadnezzar the king. 12 months later, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. The king reflected and said, is this not Babylon the great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty? While the word was in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven, saying, King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared, sovereignty has been removed from you, and you will be driven away from mankind, and your dwelling place will be with the beasts of the field. You will be given grass to eat like cattle, and 7 periods of time will pass over you until you recognize that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind and bestows it on whomever he wishes. Immediately the word concerning Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled, and he was driven away from mankind and began eating grass like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair had grown like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird's claws. But at the end of that period, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, but he does according to his will in the host of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth, and no one can ward off his hand or say to him, what hast thou done? At that time my reason returned to me, and my majesty and splendor were restored to me for the glory of my kingdom. And my counselors and my nobles began seeking me out, so I was reestablished in my sovereignty, and surpassing greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are true, and his ways just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride.
So consider the beginning and the end of that passage. At the beginning, he was saying, this is my kingdom, it is for me, I established everything, it is for my majesty and glory. And at the end of that passage, he says, God is the king, it is for him, he's the one that's able to humble those that are pride and lift them up again. So 1 year after Daniel interprets the dream, Nebuchadnezzar is forgetful, right? He lifts himself up in pride, crediting himself for the creation of his kingdom and the glory of his kingdom. How was this foretold by the tree in the dream? What aspect of the dream represents Nebuchadnezzar's pride? The height. Yeah. Absolutely. The height of the tree, the great height of the tree, and the fact that it could be seen from everywhere. So this is an important lesson. What is the danger of pride?
You can fall.
You can fall. Yes, it does. Norm?
Is there a reason why they went from speaking in the third person to speaking then in the first person? They're quoting Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, he's talking.
Yeah.
Before that,
Yeah.
they're talking about him. Is there, you think there's
I
a
didn't
reason
notice
why?
that. I didn't notice
Yeah,
that.
because it is with King Nebuchadnezzar said, I.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that
I looked back, he's the first person at the beginning.
when he's
Dream,
telling
yeah,
his dream.
That's right. That's right.
And you know, this part
Nebuchadnezzar.
of Daniel is not even written in Hebrew. It's written in Aramaic. This is the part of the Bible. It's when Daniel was in exile. Remember, the good figs go to exile. He writes part of Daniel in Hebrew and part of it in Aramaic. So this is even written in the common language at the time. So there's probably something interesting there.
They switch back and forth.
Yeah. I like your critical mind thinking about that.
All written.
So here's a few verses on pride. We can learn this from Nebuchadnezzar. Pride goeth before destruction, right, Ella? And a haughty spirit before a fall. I'm saying that because she quoted that, not because I'm trying to teach her a lesson. Right, Ella?
We need to hear.
Here's a warning directly for you. No. Matthew 23:12, whosoever shall exalt himself, that's what Nebuchadnezzar did, shall be abased. He's going to be cut down. And he that shall humble himself shall be exalted, which is the opposite. Humble yourself and be exalted. James 4:10, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he shall lift you up. He shall lift you up, not yourself. 1 Peter 5:6, humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. So either humble yourself or be humbled by God. One is less painful than the other, right? The higher the tree, the harder the fall. Why should we humble ourselves? Because our most excellent example of how you should live a human life, Jesus, was the most humble of all. Philippians 2:5-11 describes how Jesus left the majesty of heaven. He humbled himself exceedingly and inhabited a human body and became a man. And then he further humbled himself by becoming obedient to death on the cross, which he did not have to do. He did it because he was saving the world, essentially. But he humbled himself and became a man. He humbled himself to death on a cross. And because of his humility, God has lifted him up exceedingly high, where his name is above every name, and at his name every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that he is Lord. So he's the ultimate example. He went from the highest heaven to death on the cross, and because of his humility, he's exalted above all. So that's our example in Jesus. Now, looking at verses 31 and 33 of the passage we just read, how swiftly was this watcher's decree carried out? Immediately, right? He's hanging out on his porch. He's looking at his kingdom, and he's saying, man, I've done a good job. I've built this kingdom. It's for my majesty and my... While he's speaking these things and thinking these thoughts, the word is sent forth to cut him down, right? At the very hour, in verse 33, it says, the same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar. The same hour that he exalted himself, this destruction occurs. Remember, the same hour. As a result of his pride, what happened? What happened to King Neb?
He was eating grass and his hair got all yucky and his nails grew out like bird talons.
Yes, he didn't clip his nails. He was like a wild beast of the field. Who do you think was running the kingdom at the time? Probably Daniel was overseeing things while Nebuchadnezzar's out eating grass and grazing, covered with the dew of heaven. It's really interesting how he's described. His hair grew and his claws grew so that he looked like a what? A wild animal, but specifically even more specific than a bird, an eagle, right? An eagle. I'm thinking he has the nice wings of gray, his hair's getting long. It says that his hair grew like eagle's feathers and his nails grew like eagle's claws. I think it's fascinating that he's described as looking like an eagle. because he's been described as an eagle before. If we go back to Daniel chapter 7, remember Daniel has the visions of the 4 beasts, and the first beast that he sees corresponds with that head of gold from Nebuchadnezzar's statue. Daniel 7:4 says the first beast that he saw, which is pertaining to Babylon, was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. This is Daniel's vision. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar has the vision of the metal statue where he's the gold head. Daniel has a parallel vision of those 4 different beasts. The first one that he sees is this lion with eagle's wings. It corresponds to the kingdom of Babylon. And he says the wings were plucked, a heart of a man was given to it, and he was made to stand up on his feet, which is exactly the dream that we're interpreting for King Nebuchadnezzar, right? He's cut down, but then he returns to his senses. His reason comes back to him, and he acts like a man again. He had the heart of a beast, and now he has the heart of... So it's consistent with Daniel's vision. Also in Ezekiel 17, we've mentioned this briefly. If you'll remember when we were looking at the fig tree as a representative of Israel, Jeremiah 24 says the good figs are going to go into exile and the bad figs stay behind. Remember when we studied that? In Ezekiel 17, the same thing is told about a vine. A vine is going to be planted in Babylon, but it's going to want to turn its roots back toward Egypt. Well, in that particular parable, Nebuchadnezzar is described as an eagle with great wings, long-winged, full of feathers with diverse colors. So later on, Ezekiel says this eagle is King Nebuchadnezzar. So Daniel describes Nebuchadnezzar as an eagle. According to the way he looked as during the 7 times passing over him as a beast, he also sees him as an eagle in his visions, and then Ezekiel is describing him as an eagle, which is fascinating. This great eagle that Ezekiel describes takes the highest branch of a cedar. He takes of the seed of the land and plants it in a fruitful field. So that's speaking of taking the seed of the kings and the princes of Israel and putting them in exile in Babylon. And then later on, Ezekiel interprets it and he says that eagle is King Nebuchadnezzar, and that vine that was planted is the princes and the nobility of Israel. So very fascinating that he's described as an eagle in different places. Now, after the whole ordeal is past, how does Nebuchadnezzar respond to his experience? Yeah, how he should. He's humbled, right? And his words indicate his heart. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? When his reason returned, he wasn't bitter and angry and mad. He was giving glory to God. What lesson does Nebuchadnezzar want to teach? What does he want other people to know as a result of his experience?
Same thing he
Yeah.
It's not all about us. God is on his throne.
Yes, God is on his throne. Nebuchadnezzar is a great king. He has a kingdom reaching to the ends of the earth, but it's not for himself. He's pointing to the sovereign God, the king over all. So based on his wise response to his humbling, he was restored, right? They said his nobles sought him out, his majesty was returned to him, and he returned to rulership over Babylon. Can you imagine the newspaper headlines at the time? All of this is going on in Babylon. Where's Nebuchadnezzar? He looks like an... And all the pictures in the tabloids. Look at his eagle's wings, you know? Really amazing. So in this particular dream, the tree represents an individual. That individual is King Nebuchadnezzar. So the application of the interpretation is within that context, within that time frame. It has an immediate meaning for the people in the story. But as we saw with the parable of Judges 9, the bramble tree last week, there is something deeper about this story that helps us to understand things to come. It's like a fractal, right? It has a small application in one spot, but then it has a greater application, which is the same pattern that we can all benefit from. So I believe this has an application to eschatology. Eschatology, of course, is the study of things of the end. So what we're going to do is take this dream that Nebuchadnezzar has, which is valid in pointing to the events that surrounded his life, and see how it is consistent with Babylon as it's described both in Genesis and Revelation. It's really fascinating. So let's talk about the great height of the tree. Just to be clear, over what kingdom did Nebuchadnezzar rule? Babylon. He ruled over Babylon. Daniel interprets the tree to represent Nebuchadnezzar himself, but the branches, the leaves, and the fruit are all extensions of his kingdom. So Babylon first shows up in the book of Genesis, right? Who was the ruler or the founder? Here's a good trivia question. The founder of Babylon in Genesis. Do we know his name? The founder,
We know it, but we can't pull it out.
Assyria and Babylon. You could say the first world ruler, Nimrod, right? So, right. He was a single ruler, and he shows up in Genesis. They construct the Tower of Babel. Babylon, the name is related to the name Babel, right? So in Genesis 11:4, on the next page of your notes, about the Tower of Babel, the foundation of Babylon, it says, "And they said, Go to, let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven." So the purpose of Babel at that time was to build a tower whose height was exceedingly great, and specifically it says to reach unto heaven. If you'll remember, Nebuchadnezzar's tree, remember Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon, his tree reached up to the height of heaven. So you've got a tall tower identifying the origins of the Babylonian kingdom, and here you have this tall tree representing the king of Babylon. Just as Nebuchadnezzar's tree reached up to the height of heaven, it can be seen from all over the earth. The end time world kingdom, Babylon the Great, will stretch its authority over the whole world. So Revelation 17 and 18 describe this end time kingdom, this new world order, this one world government. If you look at politics and the things that are happening in the news, there's all this talk about globalism, uniting the world under one single government and one ruler. It's a sign of the end times, right? It's a sign of that end times Babylon. Revelation 13:7 describes this. "And it was given unto him," the Antichrist, "to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations." This is about Babylon in Revelation, right? If we look at Nebuchadnezzar's tree, it reached up to the height of heaven. It could be seen from all over the earth. The same thing is going to be true of that end time world government. It can be seen, that means it can be recognized from all over the world, and it's going to have a great height, great strength, just like Babylon's tree. It was given rulership over kindreds, tongues, and nations. So it is consistent with Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Shelter and fruit for the beasts and fowls were found in Nebuchadnezzar's tree. Let's consider the shelter, the fruit, and specifically the fowls that were nesting in this tree. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, fowls and beasts found shelter in the branches of the great tree. So think of all of the verses that we've read in Revelation that are consistent with this tree. Revelation 18:2. "And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean" what? "And hateful bird," right? So the end times Babylon is described as a habitation of every unclean and hateful bird. If we look at Nebuchadnezzar's tree, it was providing shelter for the fowls of the air and the beasts of the field, consistent with Revelation. Neb's tree had green leaves and much fruit for sustaining all, and the fruitfulness, if you want to call it that, of end times Babylon is described in Revelation 18. All nations, the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies, right? Think about all of the birds and fowls feasting on the fruit of this tree. In Revelation 18, 12, and 13, the specific fruits are listed, and there's 28 of them, right? Think of these as fruit on the tree: the merchandise of gold, silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet, thyine wood, so on and so forth. all the way down to horses, chariots, and slaves and souls of men. So it describes the products of this end times kingdom Babylon. It's about economy, it's about merchandise, it's about buying and selling and trading, all of these things. So the tree of Nebuchadnezzar was shelter for the birds. It had plenty of fruit. Revelation tells us that end times Babylon has become the habitation of every unclean bird, and there's plenty of products that are associated with Babylon. So we can see a correspondence between his dream and end times Babylon. Now let's talk about the ruler. This kingdom will have one ruler known as the Antichrist or the beast, right? And this Antichrist is known for his bragging, for his proud and blasphemous words, and speaking out against God. How will the Antichrist exalt himself? So consider Daniel 8. Remember, he's described as a little horn. Remember studying the 10 horns and the 7 and uprooting 3, and then here comes the little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, east, and toward the pleasant land. So imagine, it can be seen from all the places on the earth. It waxed great even to the host of heaven. Think about the height of the tree reaching up to heaven. And it cast down some of the hosts and the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. What's Nebuchadnezzar doing on his porch? He's saying, all this kingdom is for me and for my glory. That is also going to be true of the little horn, which is another way of saying Antichrist. He's saying he magnifies himself. Daniel 11, he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. And there at the end, he shall magnify himself above all. So just like Nebuchadnezzar was exalting himself right before his fall, the Antichrist has the same characteristics. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. The Antichrist is the king of the end time world kingdom, and he is exalting himself. Same characteristics. The Antichrist obtains his power and authority directly from Satan, right? Next page of your notes, Revelation 13. The beast is another name for the Antichrist. The dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. And if you consider what Satan's original sin was, if you could put his sin in one word, how would you describe it? Pride. Absolutely, pride. Magnification of self above God. Isaiah 14 is a description of Satan himself. And listen to all of the words that indicate how Satan elevates himself in pride. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground? Do you see the tree's been cut down? I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne. I will ascend above the heights of the cloud. I will be like the Most High. All of these are describing Satan as elevating himself up to the height of heaven. But it did say, how thou art cut down, just like that tree was cut down. So let's talk about the fall of the tree. Recall how Nebuchadnezzar initially had the heart of a man, but the heart of a beast was given to him for a period of time. Is it any wonder that the Antichrist is called the beast? Right? Remember, this tree had the heart of a man. It was given the heart of a beast until 7 times passed over him. When Nebuchadnezzar's great tree was cut down, he immediately became like the beast of a field. And so the pattern there, the tree falls, and then Nebuchadnezzar becomes like a beast until 7 times pass over. So there's this falling, there's this crash, and then there's this beast that is in its place, right? Nebuchadnezzar looking like an eagle and eating grass. Considering 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 and 4, Paul says, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first. Think of the great tree crashing to the ground, right? And that man of sin be revealed. When Nebuchadnezzar's tree fell, he became like a beast, and he went out and looked like an eagle. The son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So there's this great falling away. There's this revelation of the man of sin, and he is exalting himself. All of that is consistent with Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Let's talk about the hour. As the words of pride and self-exaltation were coming out of Nebuchadnezzar's mouth, at that very hour, his great tree fell, and he entered into his punishment as a beast. Think about similar wording in the book of Revelation. Revelation 14:8, what does it say? Babylon is fallen, is fallen. What would you say if you were going to cut down a tree, right? Look out first. But after it hits, boom, timber, right? So this phrase that the angel pronounces, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. What happens to the tree when it's cut down? It is fallen, right? Revelation 18:17 and 19. For in 1 hour, so great riches is come to naught. Remember, at the very hour that Nebuchadnezzar is exalting himself, his tree is cut down and he becomes a beast. This is saying in 1 hour, this kingdom will be destroyed. In 1 hour, she is made desolate. Let's talk about the 7 times passing over Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar grazed with the beasts of the field until 7 times passed over him. Do we know anything about some sort of 7 times or something like that? That's 70, right? That's a multiple, which is related. But is there a period of 7?
The end times.
The week? Tribulation, 7 years. The 70th week, maybe that's what you were thinking too, the 70th week.
7 signifies completeness.
Right, in a nutshell. Yes, absolutely. So the next set of verses there are just to associate this end times tribulation period, the 70th week of Daniel, with the fact that the watcher from heaven told Nebuchadnezzar, you're going to be a beast of the field until 7 times pass over you. This is directly connected with Daniel 9:27, where the 70 weeks are given, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Now, we've done extensive study about this. Jim, I don't know if you've ever studied Daniel or Revelation, but we've been through this step by step, so this may be a lot if you've never studied that. But it says 1 week. We understand that to be a period of 7 years. In the middle of that week, 3.5 years on either side, is when the abomination of desolation occurs, according to Daniel and Matthew and other places. So this 7 times is described in different ways. The way we know that it's 7 years is because it's described in different locations using different units of time or conversion factors. So half of that week, half of that 7 is described as a time times and half a time. That's 3.5 years. It's described in Revelation 11 as 42 months or 1,203 score days. So we know that this period, this 3.5 year period, is 42 months and 1,203 score days. That gives us exactly 3.5 years. That's half of the 7. So the 7 times is 7 years. Okay, so Revelation 12:6 is described as 1,203 score days. Revelation 12 again describes it like Daniel, a time times and half a time, and then Revelation 13 for 40 and 2 months. So again, that's half of the 7. So the fact that the holy watchers decree upon Nebuchadnezzar, 7 times are going to pass over you, and he's the king of Babylon, it's consistent with eschatology in saying there's this 7-year tribulation period where there will be a beast in power over this end times Babylon. Now we know the tree was cut down, but Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom was restored to him. So let's talk about what that might mean as far as eschatology goes. Babylon is one of the oldest kingdoms described in the Bible. We know it has its origins in Genesis. It begins in Genesis, it's resolved in Revelation. Although Babylon is no longer a world kingdom, the book of Revelation refers to the end time New World Order as Babylon. So you could say it was in existence at first in Genesis. There was the Tower of Babel issue, and God came down and scattered the language. There was this resurgence at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, but the Babylonian kingdom is no longer in existence, but that's how the end times kingdom is described. So you can see it raising its head several different times throughout history. But it was, and then it was not, and then it was, right? So there's King Nebuchadnezzar in his kingdom. He's cut down, he becomes the beast of the field, and then he is restored again. So we have scriptures in Revelation that attest to this as well. Revelation 17:8, the beast that thou sawest was and is not and shall ascend, and the beast that was and is not and yet is. Now, we spent like a lot of time trying to figure out what all of that meant, but we can at least see there's a tree, it's been cut down, and then it's restored. Revelation, I skipped a. Though Jesus Christ will destroy the beast and the false prophet with the brightness of his coming, Satan goes into perdition in the bottomless pit for 1,000 years, but at the end of that millennial reign, he's given one last opportunity to tempt mankind, right? Revelation 20 describes this. When the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and shall go forth to deceive the nations again. So there's this end time kingdom of Babylon. In 1 hour it is destroyed. Satan is put in prison for 1,000 years, yet he comes back at the end of that millennial reign. So you can see the tree's been cut down, it's fallen, yet it is restored, even if for a little while. Now, Nebuchadnezzar responded rightly. He was humbled, he gave glory to God, and his kingdom was restored to him. His majesty was restored. This will not be true of the beast and false prophet in the book of Revelation or of the kingdom of Babylon. Look what Jeremiah 51 says, and I find this utterly amazing. It says, Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. Howl for her. Take balm for her pain, if so she may be healed. So it's saying there's an opportunity for Babylon to be healed. Just like Nebuchadnezzar was given an opportunity to repent, this says there's an opportunity. Think about Nineveh. Jonah preached destruction is coming, yet they repented and that destruction was averted. Look what it says. We would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. So God is so incredibly gracious and able that given the right heart of the recipient, he would heal Babylon. But it says Babylon refuses. So here's the conclusion of this very lengthy lesson. Last week we were looking at the bramble tree, the thorn bush, representing an individual in that time and context, yet it also pointed to the Antichrist. This is true as well. Nebuchadnezzar's great tree represents Nebuchadnezzar in his time and in his context, yet it also has a greater meaning. It is consistent with the king of Babylon in the book of Revelation and his kingdom. So what happens to Nebuchadnezzar's tree is a foreshadow of what happens to the tree of Babylon in the book of Revelation. So where we are in this study, we have clearly seen how the Bible uses trees to represent nations. Now we have a couple of examples of how the Bible uses trees to represent individuals. Again, this is leading us to understand what is the tree of life and what is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So next week we will be looking at olive trees. Okay, we've already studied olive trees representing the nation of Israel. Next week we're going to look at 2 specific olive trees representing 2 individuals. You know who they are? Good job. The 2 witnesses. Exactly. It's a good thing she answered, because if nobody answered, I was just going to be like, okay, we'll wait till next week. So thank you, Willow.